Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Acoustic Alchemist podcast. I'm your host, Emrys Abner, and joining me is Anthony Rella, author of Slow Magic, new book that just came out through Llewellyn. Nice to have you here, Tony.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're able to make it. So I had a chance to read through Slow Magic, and I think the concept of it, just like the general concept of slowing down and making your spiritual practice something that you should savor instead of jumping through and trying to do everything as fast or as efficiently as possible. I think that's such a needed thing today. It's just a great message. What prompted you to write the book?
Well, in honesty, it was a few years ago during the weekend when Roe versus Wade was overturned. I was on just taking a vacation, and my partner and I were listening to recordings of the January 6th hearings on the way down, and then the decision came out, and it sort of confronted me with the cultural changes that obviously now are fully underway. And I was really struck by how in my lifetime reproductive rights and abortion access were considered sort of settled issues, except for these people who were constantly against it. But it was sort of, that was always like, well, it'll never change. They can protest all they want. And then all of a sudden there was this huge victory. And I had this thought of, these people have been working in what for them was a hopeless situation for decades, and yet they persevered and somehow they won. And I thought, I want my people to have that same perseverance and determination, because I had a sense that we would need it, in this kind of the pendulum of history. And it's not that I'm very much in favor of abortion access, but I just have to acknowledge the tenacity of that particular approach, or that group that was against it. That got me to think about both culture and politics, but also my personal experience of becoming studying witchcraft and practicing magic, especially during the 2008 recession, when I was really impacted by it, and I felt at one of my lowest points in life, and I really clung to my spiritual practice for solace, for survival, for hope, and it helped to carry me through, but in this very long kind of rebooting my life process that took maybe about 4 years, maybe longer. But I had to keep going back to my practice and finding ways to believe in myself, certainly believe in myself, and certainly hold on to the idea that I could have a better future, in spite of what my inner experience and the evidence in front of me was telling me. And so I realized that those practices and lessons were really beneficial to me and seemed relevant to this moment and this larger question of how can a magical practice serve us in times of difficulty. And so it all just sort of coalesced into this idea, and I got the title and then the outline of the book that weekend, which is kind of incredible. It just all was like, oh, these are the things I should talk about, and here's what I should go through. And so it's like the idea kind of emerged from this cauldron of thought and
yeah, and I would tend to agree with you, especially when it comes to policy decisions where we seem to have this preference for quick solutions and not necessarily lasting solutions. Yeah, if the left could be more tenacious about the things that it wants and willing to put in the work and wait to see the fruits of those things, like policies that may not show their true worth for 10 years or
right.
more.
Right.
Like, we need that kind of thought, because we can't do this every 4 years flip-flopping the switch. Like,
yeah.
That's not a way to move forward. That's a way to stay exactly where you are or move backward.
Right. And it feels like there's a sense of sort of either everything has to change at once and be perfect for it to be pure. Well, I mean, pure maybe, but like, I appreciate the sort of systemic view of problems and saying like it's this whole system that's creating these problems, but then the idea starts to be somehow the whole system has to change for us to make any progress, and any change only reinforces the system, which in some ways is true. You know, the system adapts to any changes that you make, but on the other hand, it is really unlikely that an entire system is going to be dismantled and destroyed. And even if that did happen, the chaos that would ensue makes it really unlikely that the leftist utopia would like really just emerge from that destruction right away. So any path is going to take some tenacity, some compromise, but compromise kind of coupled with this long-term vision that we're still moving towards.
Right, and we can have the same view with our spiritual practice. Like there are things and there are times to do workings for immediate things, but then also to have these longer-term goals, systemic goals, cyclical goals that you could be working on in perpetuity or along some kind of a schedule, just something that allows you to not, like you said, necessarily change the whole landscape of what you're living in, but chipping away at it.
Right. Yeah, there's a similar, I think, on a personal level. I mean, I know I experience this, and I hear a lot of people experience this, but sometimes we hit roadblocks in life, or your relationship with yourself, or your partner, your family, and there's this feeling like, I wish I could just drop everything and like leave, maybe go to a new town, just like start completely fresh, because I feel so stuck and like it's impossible to make changes in my current conditions. And sometimes there's benefits to a change like that, but it tends to work better if that change is intentional and part of a longer term. You know, moving here puts me closer to this resource or this thing I want to experience, versus I'm just running away from everything that feels stuck, because that stuckness, whatever it is in us that created that stuckness, will go with us, and eventually we're going to have to work with whatever in me is keeping me stuck. And there's a lot of merit in deciding I'm just going to work on my life as it is and confront whatever it is that's keeping me from advocating for these changes, for, you know, whatever I'm afraid, you know, my mom will say if I say this to her, or how my partner will react if I draw a line, or you know, whatever fears I have if I make this change. You know, I think that's the scarier path, even though it's the less dramatic, more subtle path than just I'm going to blow up my life and start over.
But I think there's kind of an unconscious draw towards the whole blow it up and start over thing. It reminds me of something that my therapist had said. We were talking about, like, why would suicidal ideation happen? And obviously, I mean, I was prefacing the question, like, why would a healthy brain basically fantasize about its own destruction? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, I mean, a healthy brain doesn't. But one of the things that happens in unhealthy brains that makes that seem like an attractive option is that when you are in a situation where you feel like you have no control, mm-hmm. you still have control over your life.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that only you can control. And so there is this weird comfort in, like, saying, I'm fantasizing about doing this thing because it's comforting, because I can control it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same kind of feeling people get when they're like, I need to move, or I need to make dramatic life changes. Like, I need to control something, and I can't control my job or my spouse or my kids or whatever is causing the stress, but I can control this other thing.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I mean, when I talk to my clients, you know, I think of it as sometimes you just need to know where the exit door is in case of emergency, and feeling overwhelmed by your suffering or stuck, or this idea like someday it will be too much, and and I need to know that I can get away from if it's too much. Sometimes that's one of the functions of suicidal ideation is here is the ultimate exit door, and it can be comforting. It can even be empowering for some people to know that the option is there. And all I mostly say about that is it's just you can only do it once. Like there's other coping strategies you can do multiple times, but suicide is like you can only do it once, and then it's done. So maybe try some other stuff first, but also it's okay to find comfort in knowing where the exit door is. And you're right. I think that's true about I'm just going to start over. I'm going to start a new life. There is comforting to know that that's possible if things are too much.
And is there a magical equivalent to that?
To the exit door?
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. Would it be okay to say more about what you're thinking, or
yeah.
That's a question you're just
Yeah. What is there a magical equivalent to this is too much? I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need a way out. Because I think sometimes people do get into a spiritual working, and it overwhelms. Maybe it overwhelms their senses. Maybe it overwhelms their sense of self. Maybe it overwhelms what they like, their expectations of the experience, and they find themselves scared by what happened. I hear that a lot, especially when people are maybe like doing rituals to talk to demons for the first time.
Yeah. I was just thinking about demon work as you were saying that, because that's the one moment if you start to freak out that things could really go off the rails. Yeah, that's a great question. As I'm listening to you, I think spiritual practice itself can be a way of, not necessarily in ritual, but just in my day-to-day life. I feel overwhelmed, so I'm going to sit and gaze at this candle. Or I think deity work and ancestor work is like just anything that builds alliances is a lot of that. I'm really out of my depth here. I need support, and here are these beings who have energy and perspective and skill that I don't have, and so I'm going to ask them to help back me up here because I'm just really overwhelmed. So I think that's one way, but it is an interesting question. If a ritual goes off the rails, because there are times. I think with demon work, what I've found in those moments is I need to call in my power more. So I usually reach for, my wand or my blade, like the symbols of my magical power. Just remember, I'm in charge here. This is my ritual. I get to tell them no, I get to tell them it's too much or they need to back off. And if I can access that, that really helps. But I think, if you can't access that, if you really get overwhelmed, that's a great question. How do you get out of that?
When I'm doing rituals, I usually have kind of two fail-safes that I keep nearby. If something really goes wrong, I've got a fifth pentacle of Mars, which is the one with the scorpion in the center. It's like, in common parlance, people call it the demon trap. And that's a really great way to just shut it down. You're not going to get a whole lot of work done with that particular pentacle, but it's really great at stopping things.
Yeah.
The other one that I have is I've got a kamea, which is basically it's for those who are unfamiliar, a kamea is like a table with different letters and numbers in it, different combinations. The one that I'm using is borrowed from the Jewish Kabbalah tradition as opposed to the Hermetic Kabbalah tradition. And it's basically a call to all the choirs of angels at once. It's like an emergency button. And you just look at the sigil and recite these, there's like 3 words. And that's supposed to basically bring a backup team. And I've never had to use that one. That's always been my like break glass in case of emergency type situation. But it's comforting to know that it's there. And if things get a little iffy, sometimes I'll remind whoever I'm talking or whatever entity I'm talking to that I have this resource right here. Mm-hmm. I don't want to use it, so can we just be cool with each other, please?
I love that. That's such a good practice and a reminder to kind of come up with something as you get more advanced in your practice to have an exit. You know, I'm thinking like a large piece of hematite too. If I just like grab it, it just shuts things down. Also, Ivo Dominguez Jr. has something in his books he calls the square of abeyance, Abeyance, and it's basically this square you draw that just sort of, once you sit in it, like everything spiritual is neutralized and you're just, kind of a meat sack chilling out. And that seems like something you might have on hand as well. So I think it's a good reminder to come up with something like that could help you to shut down a practice if it's getting out of hand.
You know, it's comforting just to have it in the space and just to know that it's there, even if you don't use it. When I help people make servitors, I always include a kill switch, which is a phrase that is a bunch of made-up syllables that no one would ever utter by accident. And then I put it in the document for the client, and I put it in white font against a white background so they can't even see it unless they intentionally highlight it. That way you can't mistakenly use it. But if you need to use it, your servitor gets unruly, all you have to do is say this phrase, and poof, they're gone. Which, when a servitor goes wrong, that's really all you can do. It's I haven't seen a whole lot of cases with them where it's like a fixable problem. It's usually when something goes wrong with the servitor, it's like you gotta kill it and make a new one. Mm-hmm. Digressing back to the book. I like taking digressions, but I do want to talk about the book. Is you had kind of said earlier about looking at the pendulum of history, and I think you kind of get at that idea in your book as well, that not just history, but groups of people and movements and individuals and couples, like we all have these pendulums, like our life moves in different types of cycles that have different types of movement. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's a way, it's in some ways it is a very astrologically informed, from my perspective in thinking about these cycles within cycles, the ways that the planets move in space and in relation, the astrological chart is an abstraction, kind of charting where the planets are in relation to the Earth, which is not how they obviously move through space because they're moving around the sun. But I think it's useful to have that because we experience the planets here on Earth, so it's centering our experience and how those energies are in relationship to us as a point. And so when we can look at those as cyclical things, and you can look at that in your personal history or the larger sense, each of these planets is representing or embodying or transmitting a particular current of energy or force or experience, and they're all interacting with us all the time. So, Venus is transmitting like love and pleasure and value, and Mars is transmitting kind of harshness and self-assertion and getting in your face to get what needs to be done. And you might like one more than the other, but they're both happening. And wherever they are in relationship to each other, and the astrological chart just kind of determines what they're bringing to your life or your attention, or what they're bringing to the larger cultural milieu, and the ways. So you can look at the cycles in how it interacts with you personally, and most of us already do that when we follow the moon, when we follow lunar patterns, or the sun, we follow the seasons. Those are very concrete, documented, not even woo-woo effects on our lives. When the moon's this time of day, the tide's higher than at this time of day. But also, I think the more you observe that, the more you can observe how these things interact with your personal experience or your family or your nation. And so then the other piece is when the planets appear to conjoin each other or form aspects to each other. There's sort of these, this writer named Richard Tarnas wrote a book called Cosmos and Psyche, which is a very long, interesting book in which he looks at the major outer planet conjunctions like the Pluto-Saturn conjunction and looks at whenever this happens, what are the themes that tend to come up in history. And Pluto and Saturn, which last conjoined in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, tends to correlate with an increase in illness, like pandemics tend to happen. There tends to be a hardening of boundaries, an increase in sort of authoritarian conditions or resistance to authoritarian conditions. And you can kind of look at, so it's 2020, and then I believe the early 80s, around the time of the AIDS crisis began. And you can kind of go back and you can look at these and see there's a story being told both in your life and through history. And there are these themes that we keep returning to as a species, as a people, and every time it's new and unpredictable, but also the themes are very interesting. So the COVID pandemic is very different than the AIDS epidemic, but also they raised a lot of very similar anxieties, moral judgments, conflicts, and it confronted us with the realities of illness, the realities that we're going to get sick and die and be disabled at some point in our lives, and some of us sooner than others, and it's a scary world, and you have to deal with that, and dealing with it could be really working hard to make sure you're safe and protected and minimizing your risk of exposure. Or for some people, working hard is taking a bunch of supplements, or for some people, they run counter to that and they want to do the opposite, and they feel like, I don't know, like getting sick is good for you. And, we're all just trying to deal with this theme that suddenly is really looming in our consciousness. So that's kind of, it's interesting to look at those cycles and to be, I think it helps us to prepare magically, in part because I think about these are kind of like lightning storms in the heavens, and the lightning is striking whether you want it to or not. But if you want to work with the lightning, you can put a lightning rod in a particular place that's going to draw that lightning that you could then anchor to something you want to happen. So I was preparing for this last Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I did a magical working to try to use that energy towards my greater good. And I feel like actually it worked, although it was still an incredibly hard and it's not like I loved it or I was free of the harms of it, but there was a way I was able to be in relationship with it that actually served some of my goals, which is hard to say. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be saying this out loud, but my joke, what I learned is, I'm a mental health therapist, and we profit from sorrow. Like when people are having hard times in life, they go to a therapist. And so that was a time when everyone was having a really hard time in life, me included, but also my business was doing really well. So that's just one way of kind of looking at, kind of using these cycles to think about the weather, but also how to orient yourself in relationship to them.
Yeah. It also strikes me that it kind of has a musical parallel as well, where if you think of every cycle as a wave, right? When you're mixing a band, every instrument's got its own particular wavelength that it's playing on. Mm-hmm. And then when you mix them all together, you're creating this compound wave. It's really complex compound wave. And it feels like all these influences and cycles kind of build on each other like that and create this complex wave. And by doing the workings that we are doing, it's kind of like stepping back and making sure all of the instruments are in tune.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
because if one of them's out of tune, it throws the whole complex wave off, and everything sounds a little janky. But
yeah,
when you work with all the planets or all the spirits or all the things that are in your orbit that are helping create those cycles that you are experiencing, you can kind of get them in tune with where you want to be and where you want to go. And then the complex wave makes a lot more sense.
yeah. That's beautiful. That's right. That feels great.
Yeah, I think music is it's usually an apt metaphor for magical practice for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially just the idea of harmonizing diverse influences that are happening simultaneously, and that there's a discord between them. But and what I aspire to through a magical practice is to find a way to establish some kind of harmony, if only within my being, in relationship to these changing wavelengths, it's changing vibrations.
Yeah, and sometimes, like you said, sometimes it is discord, and you can work with that. Music doesn't have to all be, bubblegum pop, really saccharine. We're only using major chords and stuff. When we listen to classical music, those people use some really crunchy chords, man. Mm-hmm. They use some really complex, like, if played on their own, disgusting sounding chords. Mm-hmm. But they put them in between two beautiful things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And going through, hearing the beautiful thing, going through the crunchy, ugly thing, and then hearing the beautiful thing again makes you appreciate it more. Which, it's another cycle. Like one of the things in your book you kind of talk about is different directionalities, and talking about how time can be a line or a cycle or a spiral, and that it just makes a lot of sense when we're working with our magic to figure out what kind of time am I working with, and what shape of time am I working with, so that the working that you're doing can have the impact you want it to have. And it makes sense to, if you're working with time as a cycle, then it makes sense to wait for that time in the cycle when it's appropriate to do the working. But maybe cycles aren't important to what you're doing. Maybe this is, a straight A to B type of thing, in which case you'd be better served by doing something quick and dirty. Or if something is more long-term, systemic, perpetual, then maybe it's, maybe you're not looking to do a ritual, maybe you're looking to adopt a practice.
Yeah, and I think of, like the line and the circle are the divine twins, which, the opposites that are inherent in our experience. And they're opposing forces, they're beings that represent two ends of any polarity, but also they represent the completion of a spectrum, because they're not really separate, they're connected to each other. So linear time and cyclical time, it's all time. These are just sort of maps we're imposing upon time to make sense of it. And part of what I've come to realize as a metaphor since writing the book is it's kind of like the 3D glasses when I was a kid, where you had one red filter and one blue filter. And when you look through both of them together, then you got depth out of this 3D image. And to me, that's the spiral. So if I can look at time as a linear process and also as a cycle simultaneously, then you get the spiral, which is forward motion that is also cyclical. And so when you revisit it, like it's winter now, every winter is winter in a way. And also, I experience the same things every winter. I kind of, like, during the late fall, start doing a lot of comfort seeking, and I just want to be at home and be full of carbs and sleepy and not do anything. And then usually by December, I realize, well, I got to get through the winter, and this actually kind of sucks. So then I'm like, all right, I'm gonna leave the house. I'm gonna maybe not eat so many carbs. So that tends to happen for me. But how I relate to that cycle is different every year. Like this year, I might have more clarity of, I'm doing the thing again. Where in the past, I might have just been full of shame and just like, how can I be so weak? And now I can have a little bit more space from it. I mean, the shame can still pop up, but I can still have this space of, this is just what my body seems to want to do at this time of year, and I can let it consume me, or I can make a different choice, but that desire is just going to be with me. And so that's where, every time you, on a spiral, when you come back around, you're actually at a different level than you were before. And that goes back to the Saturn, Pluto, the cycles of history. It's a different pandemic, and how we respond to it is different than the last pandemic, but it's still a pandemic.
The overpopulation problem would be ridiculous, but I sometimes wish that humans had a longer lifespan so we could experience those cycles.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm thinking about, there's a book series called the Sovereign Stone Trilogy. It's a fantasy series. And the way that they present the elves in this series is really interesting because of how they view time. Because they're so long-lived. For them, they take extra time in doing everything. So, like, if I was going to meet you for coffee, it would be an all-day event where we would spend time in the garden, and then we would go, we'd go have our coffee, and then there would be like a resting period after the coffee, and maybe another walk, and there was, they just take their time with everything, and then because they're working so slowly, they're also imposing this bird's eye view on things. You could also, a more popular one might be the Ents from Lord of the Rings trilogy. They took all day to say hello when they had their Entmoot, because in Old Entish, everything takes a long time to say, so we only say the things worth saying. And don't be hasty, little hobbit, I think with longer lifespans, we'd have more of that perspective. And I don't know. There'd be pros and cons to it, but pros would probably outweigh the cons. I mean, having a shorter lifespan does give us some immediacy and spurs us to action.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'm always curious how things are going to turn out. So sometimes I wish I could live longer. And yeah, for as the internet meme says, to dogs, we're the elves because our lifespans are so long compared to theirs, and so at least we get to see certain things from a longer perspective that other beings don't get to. Yeah.
Well, and we've got the advent of books, right? We don't have to be present at historical events to know that they happened and to learn something from them. Like, the sum of human knowledge is cumulative.
Well, and that's also, what I've heard people who really have deep relationships with their gods, like that tends to be the God perspective, is that gods have such a longer timeline that they might be interested in you personally, but also in the way that you are just one chain of a very long game of chess that they're playing, and you're like one piece that they're moving, and they of course want you to be a good enough piece, but if once you die, they got to move on anyway. So there's a bit of a little bit of a distance that can come up that can be confronting for us.
I find that with angel work sometimes, that they can be sort of aloof and impersonal. And I think it's exactly that. I think they have this larger, broader perspective, and they care for us and love us, but we're also like just humans.
Right.
And I don't know that they have the emotional capacity to relate to us the way that we relate to each other, because they don't incarnate, and so they don't deal with the things that we deal with. They don't deal with like the hardships of being in a body or the hardship of one day having to leave that body. Angels have never been confronted with their own mortality, so they don't know that feeling. And so when you're talking to them, like sometimes it can feel like they're distant or even a little robotic. And I think it's just because their nature is so different from ours.
Well, and also I think about human developmental cycles, that we all pretty much have to go through. And so if you're someone who has to work, like a being who has to work with humans multi-generationally, it's probably helpful to have some distance and aloofness, because just I'm thinking about been raising a puppy this year. I've had dogs before, but they've usually been a bit older. So this is my first exposure to really young puppy, and it's hard. And I keep remembering, like, she won't be like this forever. In a couple of years, she'll be just like the dogs I used to have, and I can't judge my old dogs from this young puppy because they were at a different place developmentally. And if I think about having to do that over and over again, and having this kind of new 20-something magician show up and be like, I'm ready for all the powers of the universe. And if I'm an angel, I'm like, oh, okay, yes, I know you are. Of course you want all the powers of the universe, so we're going to do this for a while, and then we're going to like...
Oh, I think I've gotten the slow your roll talk a couple of times. And we see it in other works of fiction too, where people are, writing immortal characters, and often one of the things that they're faced with is, I have to watch the people that I love grow old and die, and I never will.
Right.
And after going through that a few dozen times, a lot of times the characters will be written in such a way that they distance themselves from any deep relationships, kind of as a way to protect themselves even a little bit. Or even a more down-to-earth example, when I was living at that monastery in Mississippi, I was a volunteer for the year, and they got a couple of new volunteers every year. And my first week there, I was trying to get to know all the brothers, because I'm going to be living with them for the next year. I want to have at least some rapport. And one of the older guys was just like, "No, I don't even want to know your name." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Well, it's kind of rude. Why not?" Mm-hmm. He's like, "I'm 80-something years old. There's a new one of you every year. Mm-hmm. I can't keep up. I just, and you're going to be gone in a few months anyways. Mm-hmm. So I don't really see the point in getting to know each other." Initially, I thought, like, what? That's not a perspective I really care for. Mm-hmm. After sitting with it for a little bit, I thought, yeah, and actually from his perspective, that probably makes a whole lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, time is weird. It plays with our perceptions in so many of these subtle ways that we don't necessarily realize unless we take the time to noodle it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you've got, in chapter 10, you are talking about the spirit allies of slow magic. And you name a couple of different things. I mean, there's enough here that I think people from whatever tradition can find something they can grab onto. You talk about ancestors, guardians, beasts, gods, souls. Maybe tell us a little bit about like your experience with these spirit allies, working with your methodology of magic.
Yeah, I feel like I've worked with almost all of those at some point in my life, which is good. Otherwise, I shouldn't have written about them. And and there's been seasons where some things are more present than others, and then times when I feel like I need to go in deeper. And all of these things are relationships, and they're relationships and where they kind of come in and out of focus in my practice. And for a long time, for example, ancestors, I had no relationship with my ancestors. I felt no way to connect to them. I tried doing ancestor work with people, and I felt like the ancestors weren't responding, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I tend to be learning in communities of mostly white witches who had very contentious relationships with their ancestors, who had a lot of wounding from their ancestors or about their ancestors, and just didn't really want to engage or know how to engage. And then I had this experience that I think I wrote about in the book, where I encountered a kind of a malignant spirit that had this appearance of a being from voodoo. And so I went to ask a mambo about it, and she was basically like, that's kind of, you need to get your ancestors in order, because that's like, that's just an indicator. And I think that's just the shape this spirit took for me as a way to get me to connect to that teaching. I don't think it necessarily meant I'm called to voodoo as a practice, but because I can talk to that person, I got a framework of working with the ancestors that actually, okay, this makes sense. Kind of the reasons they're not responding to me is because I haven't given them anything. I haven't sent any energy to them. I haven't made a place for them in my life. And so I just, now I've got a place for them. I'll occasionally check in with them. There was a time I worked pretty regularly, weekly, with my ancestors, and now it's a bit more like once a month. I aspire, I keep remembering that I want to do it weekly, and I've just kind of slowed down a bit. But there was a season where that became really important as a foundation, and working with the ancestors also helps me have a relationship with time and my own humanity that's been very helpful and grounding. And so I think that's just a piece that's been running in the background. And then sometimes these other beings will just show up to do a particular piece of work, like a beast, for a while, Gorgons were really present for me. And that was just seemed related to what was happening in the culture at the time, and also my personal experience. And similarly, just trying to get me to pay attention to something that I otherwise wouldn't have attended to if they hadn't shown up in this sort of dramatic way. And maybe that's how all of it is, now that I'm saying it out loud, because I find gods too tend to kind of come in and out of, I tend to, the Egyptian gods tend to show up for me a lot and seem to have claimed me in a particular way. And there's so many. There's just so many of them. And there are some that I come back to and I continue to deepen my relationship with. But some will just show up and say, it's your time to pay attention to me. It's my time to get the attention, and so I'll make a space for them and spend a season or two with them, and then it feels like that's enough for now. And then others are more close to my heart.
I mean, I think that's how it works with people too, though, right? Friends come in and out of your life. Some of them are only there for a particular portion of it. Like maybe you're only really friends with that person because you're in the same location for an amount of time, and when you're in different locations, the friendship doesn't last. Or maybe you've got a relationship with a really great mechanic who you only see the mechanic when your car is busted, but that's what they're there for.
Right.
So I kind of imagine when spirits come into our lives and say, I am going to help you with this, I kind of picture them monitoring our lives and looking and going, you know what? I think I can help with that. I got this one. You guys, I got this one. And they just butt in and introduce themselves and help us take care of our problems, and then service rendered. See you later. And I think that's an okay way to work. Like we don't have to have ongoing relationships with every spirit we work with. That would be crazy making. There's so many.
Yeah.
Just like we don't have deep relationships with all the people in our lives. Some kind of are a little more on the surface, and some are really deep, and some are occasional, and some others shift. And I think it's just natural.
Yeah, I agree.
I was actually kind of mostly curious about the beasts part, because I've never thought of beasts as entities that I could work with. That's a new concept.
Well, yeah, and I was trying to flesh it out because I've been, I studied with T-Thorn Coyle for a long time, and in one of their books they use the Sphinx, but Eliphas Levi's, I don't know if I'm saying that right, his Sphinx that was made of the four fixed elements, the eagle, the bull, the scorpion, and the angel. Like that Sphinx and Thorn and their Make Magic of Your Life book works with that, both it as a composite and then as the individual components. And then I was in another tradition that has gods, but then they also work with these other beings that are mythological creatures that we would recognize. I don't know if I'm allowed to name them, but like a sphinx. So, and it was really clear that there's a differentiation, for example, from the gods and the sphinx. And even Thorn, I never heard or got the sense that Thorn thought the sphinx was a god. And I kind of kept asking, like, well, so are they a different class of beings? Like, how do we characterize them? You know, when I work with Medusa or a Gorgon, Medusa is kind of deity-like, but also feels different than Isis, a goddess, and so that's just I was just trying to kind of come up with a category for it, and it feels like Beast was what I came up with, and I think I've seen some other names that I think also approach what we're talking about. And it starts to kind of verge into chaos magic in my mind, because it's like working with these creatures that embody, you know, a lot of these mythological creatures seem to be metaphorical expressions of realities of human existence and kind of being in this world. And a lot of like a centaur is sort of the fusion of the animal and the more like human rational beings into one creature. And so in one way, you could say they're just metaphors trying to explain some aspect of our experience. And Gorgons, you know, tend to be, to me, they tend to really embody kind of the wounded feminine, like the women who have been hurt and cast out of society because they were traumatized, like they were both wounded and then exiled, and they're the rage and the accusation of that. And so they embody these things that are really need representation and connect to our deeper impulses and instincts that we otherwise might not be able to look at or talk about. But they also sort of have a consciousness or an agency. I mean, if you ask for them to come, they'll show up and they'll do something for you, but they don't, to me, feel like gods, in that they don't seem to need anything from me, or they don't seem to ask for anything in return, or even seem to have any particular agenda. They seem to be like some kind of symbolic interface. I don't know if that, yeah.
Yeah. And if they're not really possessed of reason in the same way that a god or a spirit is, would you say that maybe they're like more emotional beings?
Maybe.
Because like when you're describing the Gorgon, what I'm thinking of is, well, I'm thinking, what if the Gorgon is more or less an egregore of all of the emotional weight of women who have been in these situations and who have called upon the Gorgon for help and kind of poured their emotional frustration into this symbol, which then takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, I think that feels like approaching what seems to be true. That's kind of, and that's when I was thinking about chaos magic earlier. It's kind of similar to if you start praying to Superman, the kind of a similar, like Superman becomes a beast. So I think that feels right.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, just that by our attention, we can sort of make things happen in the spiritual world, which is hard to gauge sometimes because you can't always see it. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't feel real. But then when you work with them and things happen, it starts to feel pretty real. Mm-hmm. You've also got a really great chapter about working in community. And I'd like to explore that a little bit too. So what does doing magic in community mean for you?
Oh, I mean, community is so important, and it really is such a profound enhancement of our lives and our magic, and it really expands your being and what you're capable of. And it's also one of the most frustrating, demoralizing experiences we can have. So it's a real whetstone against which your blade is sharpened in working together. Yeah.
Do you see community as like a wider effort, or are you talking more specifically about your intentional community, like your family or your coven or your working friends? What's the social ecosystem you're kind of working in?
In this chapter, I would say it's more intentional community, like a coven or a lodge or a school, a group of people brought together for a shared intention to do some work together. And that's a lot of what I focus on. These days, I do think of community as less intention. When I think of community now, I think of it being like my neighbor who we might not have a lot in common and we actually have very different values, but we still share the same space. We live next to each other and we affect each other. So we have to have a relationship because we live so close together that if stuff goes down, we have to help each other out. I think that is its own kind of separate thing that I could write a chapter about that's not really magically related because it's harder to be in that kind of relationship. You don't really have a shared intention. You just happen to live next to each other and you might not be capable of having a shared intention. But when you're doing magical work together, there tends to be more of a shared intention. And so in that way, a magical community could just be a bunch of people at a conference who decided to go to the same ritual together. And just for that hour and a half, you are in this ritual container together. You're all ingredients in the soup. And so you're all part of this shared intention, shared community. And then, some people go on to try to have regular rituals together or start a nonprofit, build a larger body. And that's more the community I focus on, which is that the gifts of it that you have, especially when you're in a shared magical or religious community, you can go deep in a way because you have a cosmology that you share. Like pagans on the internet argue about everything. I mean, pagans everywhere argue about everything all the time. And also, that's interesting and useful. I don't have a problem with that. But there's only so far you can go if, I work with the Egyptian gods and this person works with some indigenous Turkish god that I don't know about. And you can have interesting cross-pollination, but it's different than a circle where we all have relationships with these same deities and we have this shared symbolic language, this shared ritual framework. You can really start to deepen together into this mystery and have your gnosis sort of inform each other or kind of tap into this deeper current. And then also you get to challenge each other. You get to see each other in a particular way. And I think humans really thrive when we're seen. When I feel seen by somebody, that's when I can really become more of myself. And also being seen by somebody sometimes means they tell me something about myself I don't want to hear, and I have to deal with that. And that also helps me to become more of myself, but it's challenging.
So if we have listeners out there who are maybe feeling a little too solitary, I got two questions. So what would be some advice you could give them about finding community? And what would be some advice to give them for things to watch out for when they're finding community?
There's a reality in which, depending on where you live, the closest community could be a couple hours away. And then there's also, I live in Seattle, where there are actually a lot of pagans, but not a lot of active communities we can plug into. I think for whatever reason, I'm not going to speculate about that, but there's always doing a search on the internet, looking up meetup groups. I don't know if meetup groups are still a thing, but for a while that was where's the local pagan meetup group? And then that's a way to start to connect to people. But also there's a lot of online communities that you can plug into now that you don't have. You can be in a community with people who don't live near you. And I think there's pros and cons to that. So I would say looking for just people, also going to your nearest sort of occult store or pagan bookstore if you have one available, and just kind of looking at what offerings are around, what public rituals are available, what classes are available. And I would just encourage a person exploring to check out a couple of public offerings of different groups, and not to, you're just dating You don't have to get married to the first group you date. It's okay to date for a while before getting married to the tradition. And getting married is like getting initiated or joining and becoming a deeper member. Because once you do that, then you're taking on more responsibility that frankly, a lot of people don't end up taking on, but you're supposed to. You're invited to. But it's okay to just check out different things and just see what really connects with you, what mysteries, what ritual practices, what teachers, and also how you're treated by the members of the community, how they welcome you or don't welcome you, how they seem to relate to, if there is a leader, a main leader, a charismatic leader, for example. I don't think a charismatic leader is always a red flag, but it's just something to notice. Is there one person who seems to be the center of everything? Does it feel more spread out, like there are a lot of people helping? I mean, I think red flags are sort of the classic cult indicators of, do these people seem to be involved in the larger world, or do they seem to be sort of cloistered in their own sphere and like they only talk to people who are like them? They don't, like, their lives are so enmeshed that there's no relationship to. I'm a little bit kind of arguing in my head with this, because the problem of a cult dynamic is like any abusive dynamic, is if it isolates you from your friends, your family, alternative viewpoints, and they're unable or unwilling to allow their participants to have that or even entertain that. That's really concerning. That's not okay. Some people try to do intentional communities where they share land together. I think there's an idealism to that, and also there's a risk to that. I mean, it makes sense to want to have that really deep community where we're really supporting each other. We're really living our values and really living our belief systems. That seems really exciting. Younger me would have been all excited about that. And also that means that your blind spots have no countering. Your blind spots are bigger if you don't take in any other perspectives. So if these people aren't talking to their families or aren't hanging out with friends outside the community, to me that is more concerning these days.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's overly insular is probably not going to end up being healthy. Mm-hmm. I would also throw out that you can find spiritual guidance for your non-traditional practice in some traditional places. Like, we attend a UU church. They don't care what I practice at all. And they have these really great spiritual messages. There's a strong community. There's a lot of social justice work. So there's some good stuff happening there. And even, it's funny that you had said that, yeah, you don't have to marry the first thing you come across. You need to date for a while. That is exactly what the local rabbi said to me when I was just curious about, like, what does the process of converting to Judaism look like? Mm-hmm. Just because I'm really enamored with their theology, and if I was going to choose a mainstream religion, that would probably be the one. But I was kind of on an information gathering mission, and she goes, all right, well, you're coming from a Christian background, so let me just spell it out. She's like, nobody's joining anything today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's like, we're not going to rush you to the baptismal font. Like, we don't, we're not really looking for the numbers. We don't need the numbers. Mm-hmm. We want to have an intentional community of people who want to be here because they want to be part of this. Mm-hmm. So hang out with us. Date us for a while. Mm-hmm. Maybe in a couple of years, we can have another conversation. Mm-hmm. And I was like, a couple of years? Wow, that's a pretty long cycle. She's like, if you want to be here, you'll still be here. Mm. And since then, I've been going to Torah study once a week just because I love the way that they analyze it. And I love the people that are in that group, and the rabbi is really cool. And she's told me, hey, I've looked you up. I know what you're into. And I'm like, yeah, is that a problem? She's like, no, if you're here to genuinely study Torah, you are welcome to be here with us. Torah's for everybody. And I'm like, well, okay, that sounds great.
I love that.
So there are places, even though, like, as people who operate outside of traditional or mainstream religions, I think we tend to write them off too easily sometimes. Mm-hmm. And just realize that there are still mainstream religion spaces where pagans are welcome, magicians are welcome. They may not like what you're doing, but they're not going to kick you out for it. Mm-hmm. And you can still find some community and some learning there too.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a long history that I think has been sort of forgotten in recent years of pagans who participated in their local Christian church or Catholic church and sort of did their paganism on the side. And that's when I was briefly flirting with voodoo in the episode I referenced earlier. So I was doing some reading and research, and many practitioners of that go to their Catholic church and are devout in their practice. And I remember there's a book I was reading where the author was talking to a practitioner about, well, at the church, doesn't the priest say, like, what you're doing is evil and sinful and you shouldn't do it? And the person's like, yeah, but they're priests. They're supposed to say that, like.
Well, that was Marie Laveau too. Marie Laveau was the voodoo queen of New Orleans. And she was a fervent Catholic till the day she died. She was friends with the bishop at the local, I guess it's a cathedral. Mm-hmm. So yeah, she was friends with the bishop at the cathedral, and they should by all rights have been mortal enemies, but they weren't. Mm-hmm. If Marie Laveau can do it in the deep South, mm-hmm. we can probably do it anywhere we like too. And let's also remember that, like, if we look back at the medieval period, which if people who are listening are like really into grimoire magic, a lot of those grimoires were penned by people who were active members of the church, mm-hmm. like Paracelsus, mm-hmm. or Johannes Trithemius, who was actually an abbot. Eliphas Levi, he was in training to become a Catholic priest. John Dee was a scientist and a religious figure and a magician. Like, a lot of these people had tons of hats that they wore. Mm-hmm. And even Isaac Newton, right? He's a scientist. He was also a religious figure. He was also a magician and alchemist. Mm-hmm. So back in the day, they didn't see the same distinction between sacred and secular that we see now.
Right.
Or between one kind of sacred and another kind of sacred.
Right.
To them, it was all the same thing. Like, science was a way to show God's glory, and magic was a way to enact divine will on the earth. Like, these were people who looked at magical practice as the peak expression of their faith. Mm. It wasn't that they were necessarily even trying to hide it. They were saying, no. If you're a really fervent believer, this is really helpful stuff. It helps us be better people. We get closer to the divine with this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people kind of write off, when these authors are writing in their books these treatises about their theology. I think a lot of times it does get written off as fake piety, so that they could avoid persecution.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Which is a convenient explanation from where we're standing in history. Mm-hmm. But I believe that their piety was completely genuine, mm-hmm. and that this was just their expression of their faith.
Yeah, there was I was reading this trilogy. C.S. Lewis wrote this sci-fi trilogy, which is pretty forgettable, but my nephew was reading it, so we were kind of reading it together. And in the third book, it's actually pretty interesting because he writes about space travel before space travel happened. So his idea of what a spaceship is just ridiculous, but it's also a very spiritual book. And in the third book, there's a description of what is, to me, very clearly a magical working, in which they're rising through the spheres, the tree of life, and the different planetary energies. And because I am familiar with that, and I have this lens, I'm like, oh, that's what he's writing about. And he and his friends, like Charles Williams, I believe, and then Tolkien, were all sort of esoteric Christians practicing magic while also being really fervent Christians. And obviously, C.S. Lewis is very influential in Christian thought. So it is an interesting, that those things have been separated out and now we imagine them to be antagonistic. And I'm sure they weren't really well loved at the time, but it's not always intention.
Yeah, I mean, even in Kabbalah, right, it has been part and parcel of Jewish religious life, especially amongst the rabbis and the scholars and things, almost since the beginning. Mm. It's been there for thousands of years, but it's always been kind of downplayed. Mm-hmm. Like, this is part of our tradition. It's okay, but it's not for everyone. And so we're not going to push it as mainstream religious thought, but we're not going to condemn it either because there's value here. And even in some Jewish services, they are bringing out esoteric thoughts from esoteric scholars, and some of those ideas do make their way into the mainstream presentation, but it's never really taught as, hey, this is something that everyone should practice. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we could just get back to that perspective?
Yeah.
Well, tell us quick, what's coming up for you? What can we be looking for on the horizon?
Sure. I'm doing a workshop on material from the book through Morningstar Mystery School, which is the school I'm a part of. And so if you go to morningstarmysteryschool.com, under their classes tab, it's called Feeding the Deep Hungers, Being and Doing. And so it's based on the chapter in the book called Being and Doing. And that will be in January, mid-January. I'm doing just like a public online workshop, so anyone can sign up for that if you're curious to have a more experiential exploration of the material. And you don't have to have read the book. I'm not going to assume that people have read the book, although please buy the book. And also, you don't even have to read it; just buy it. But also, I'm going to go to Sacred Space in Between the Worlds. I'm just going to be there as a civilian, which will be nice. So I look forward to that. And then I'll be doing a workshop at PaganaCon next year, and then also Spirit Northwest, which is a conference in Portland. This is going to be their second year. That's in April, I think. I'll be doing a workshop there, so I'm looking forward to that too.
Awesome. I'm going to be at Sacred Space as a civilian too, and I'll be at PaganaCon too. So
all right.
We'll have some chance to hang out in real life. That'll be fun.
That's great. Yeah, we can study the Torah together and talk about it.
That sounds good. That's honestly a good hang for me.
I'm really curious. Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about it. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll do that. I mean, so check out Anthony Rella, Buy Slow Magic. It's a great book. It's about 230 some pages. So it's it's not like going to be a year-long commitment. It's a good read. Pick it up. Check out his classes, and if you're in the area, come to Sacred Space. Come to PaganaCon. Say hi. All right. Well, it's great to have you. I'm sure we'll do this again. I won't even say goodbye. I'll just say catch you next time.
Yeah. Look forward to it. All right.
Take care.
Take care.